Hello and welcome back to the Chap's Guide, the channel where we talk about men's style, self-development and of course men's grooming. And you join me on a glorious sunny autumn day in England. And today I'd like to talk about a product which I've really given a good trial over the last 12 months. I can't believe it's been 12 months since I bought it, but it's my Rolex Submariner. It's the reference model 114060, or the no-date sub as it's referred to. And you know, I've had this watch for a year now. I've been wearing it consistently for that period of time. I thought I'd take this opportunity to give you a bit of a year on the wrist update of my feelings of the watch, because I did an initial video about the piece when I bought it, but in that video I just really talked about the specifics and a bit about the watch itself. I didn't talk so much about the buying experience, the owner experience, and of course now after a year, you know, I can tell you about my experiences with the watch and owning it. I'm hyper conscious that I'm making this in early September 2020, and just a few days ago Rolex announced an update to this watch in their new 2020 model Submariner, which has slight differences to this one. This model's been around for some time. Perhaps we'll just have a little recap on its history in a moment, but let's talk about this Rolex Submariner and we'll get to the bones of it. Well, perhaps before we go any further, let's just talk about this Submariner. The Rolex Submariner is possibly, let's be honest, it's probably the most iconic wristwatch in the world. In the history of wristwatches, it occupies an incredibly important place for both Rolex and for the automatic wristwatch in general, for a number of reasons. You know, it was the first real dive watch with 100-meter water resistance, which really brought the watch into the world of being a tool watch, that term that we use now, which really refers to the practicality of the watch. And it's a very practical piece, it's a very attractive piece, and it's done fabulous business for Rolex. It's probably the most copied watch in the world, the Submariner, so it has a really important place in the watch market. But you know, it's got quite a history. I mean, it goes back to 1953 when Rolex first unleashed it on the world, that coronation year for Queen Elizabeth II. This particular model, the no-date Submariner, or the Submariner to give it its real title, was released in 2020. So it's not that old, it's 8 years under the belt, but now it's been superseded. Technically it's obsolete, I guess. But some of the stats around this piece: it's got a 40-meter diameter dial, including that dive bezel, which is ceramic, which was an important function of this watch, or feature of it, because it moved from being an anodized anamilium dial or bezel, which meant that it would fade over the passage of time and also was quite easily damaged to knocks and dings. The ceramic dial means that it will never fade in color, but it is a little perhaps more susceptible to being smashed, but it will never scratch because of the nature of that material. So a big step forward in the watch world. The new Rolex Submariner, released only earlier this week, of course is also a ceramic dial. They're keeping that element of it, but they've made the new model ever so slightly larger. This model is a 40mm, the new one being 41. This one is approximately 13mm depth, so it's quite slim really for a dive piece. Many more dive watches are much thicker, and I quite like the low profile of this piece. And it has, in my configuration for my wrist, which is slightly over 6.5 inches, this watch weighs about 155 grams. So those are more of the specifics of the watch, but now I think I'll tell you more about what I think of it. I'll start this by posing the question to myself, perhaps, what attracted me to the Submariner? Well, it's important to know that I was already a Rolex owner when I bought this watch. This wasn't my first Rolex. A year or so before buying this, I purchased a stainless steel Datejust with a blue dial. And up to that point, I liked Rolex, I liked the idea of it, I liked its prestige status, and I was aware of its heritage, but not to the degree which I became invested in the brand when I bought my first Datejust. And when I became aware of that, I also then became aware of the scarcity of the stainless steel professional models, and to a degree that attracted me even more deeply to that element of the Rolex catalogue. And of the stainless steel pieces, I perhaps would have been most attracted to the GMT. It was a function I could see a great deal of use for. But then secondly, the Submariner, because I liked that robustness. I liked certain other elements of its marketing sort of route that it had gone down with Rolex. And I liked the fact that it was a tough, no-nonsense watch. It looked very different to my Datejust, which fulfilled for me in my style sort of wardrobe. That took care of the sort of dressy element of my clothes. I had a Jubilee bracelet with that watch. And it's fair to say the Datejust is very much the dressy of all my pieces. I did look for something then in another watch, which was robust, tough, a little bit more, shall we say, manly, and something that would be useful and practical, that I could wear in any situation. And the Submariner sort of loomed up for me in that regard. Another thing which really attracted me to the Submariner was, without doubt, its association with one of the literary characters which I've read throughout my life, and that's of course James Bond. I'm a classic sort of chap, and as a young boy even, I read the Ian Fleming novels, and I was aware of course that James Bond's watch in the literary world has always been the Rolex Submariner. And I think that association, being a classically styled person, sort of drew me to the watch. Having seen the films, my Bond was really Roger Moore. Growing up in the 70s and 80s, I remember Moore from time to time obviously he wore other watches as well. Seiko's was a bit of a down point for the Bond franchise, but predominantly he obviously wore some famous Rolex Submariners, and I was conscious of that. So it kind of attracted me to it. The Bond association, I think, has been great for Rolex and the Sub, because he's taken what is a functional tool watch and elevated it to being something you can wear in any situation. So, you would never ordinarily, and I actually wouldn't do so now, wear a dive watch with a tuxedo or a dinner jacket. But because Bond has done it in so many of his books, and the movies of course, that it kind of gives us a precedent that if you wanted to do that, it's not totally passé. So I like that fact that he has democratized the wearing of the Submariner to perhaps functional levels in any element of style which you can get away with now. A little bit of the thing I really like about the Sub as well is that a lot of people, particularly perhaps later converts to the Daniel Craig and the Pierce Brosnan element of James Bond, will assume of course that Bond's watch is the Omega, the various Omegas that he's worn. And it gives me almost a sort of perverted pleasure in telling them of course that it's a product placement, that Omega has clearly written a very large check to the producers of the Bond franchise to place their watch in those films. But the reality is that James Bond always has been and always will be a Rolex Submariner wearer. So it gives me a bit of pleasure when I always correct people when I say to them, oh yeah, it's the it's the Bond watch of course, and they will make the point, well, if Bond wears an Omega. Well, let me tell you about that. So when I bought the Sub, quite a few people said to me, why did you buy the Submariner? Or, in layman's terms, the no-date Submariner, meaning that I've bought the model, the 114060, which doesn't have the date complication. And I actually had the choice of both. And I bought the no-date Submariner for some very clear reasons. Firstly, being a classically styled sort of fellow, I really like symmetry. I like symmetry in all walks of life. I find, it's really frustrating when I see things which are non-symmetrical in clothing, for instance. I like to sort of weigh things up and balance things up. So when I looked at my watches, I realized that the majority of my watch collection did have date complications. And I liked the fact that this Submariner didn't have the date complication, that it was entirely symmetrical and a beautiful dial to look at. Another one of the reasons that I went for the no date is I have a Cyclops, a date complication on my Datejust. I own a Tudor GMT as well, that's got a date complication on it. And I don't wear those watches all the time, so they do run down, and it is a pain in the neck when you have to pick up my Datejust, for instance, which I don't wear from week to week quite often, and I have to reset the date. With the Submariner, I find you don't have to do that. You just set the time, it takes but a moment and you're ready to go. So it saves all the faffing around and resetting the date and things like that. That's one of the other reasons. And finally, it's the Cyclops itself. I mean, a lot of people will say that the Cyclops is iconic to Rolex, and it is, I think, on certain watches. On the Datejust, it looks appropriate. Without the Cyclops date magnifier on the Datejust, I don't think that watch would have the same appeal that it does. It's quintessential to the Rolex brand on that model. But on dive watches, I feel it's entirely superfluous. You know, you don't really need to know the date when you're diving. If you're looking at the date to time your dive, you're dead. So, you know, I found it to be something which, it just didn't work for me. I do find the Cyclops as well on my Datejust, you know, it does gather bits of detritus around it, and I do have to clean it very carefully with a cotton bud from time to time, just to get that crap off there. So I wanted a nice Rolex piece which was a clean dial with nothing marring that symmetry, and for me that was the Submariner no date. So what was the buying experience like, and did I have to wait for it? Well, the answer is good and bad. So first of all, I bought this watch from an authorised dealer in the southern English city of Bath, from an authorised dealer called Mallory. Now, Mallory, it's a fantastic store. It's an iconic store. It's been there for many, many years in Bath, and it sells all sort of jewellery. It's an authorised dealer for a great number of good prestige watch brands, including Patek Philippe, and you know, I've bought other watches from there as well. And that's important to note. I had a relationship with that authorised dealer, but not a great one. I bought one Rolex. I bought my wife a Rolex Datejust from that store earlier in 2019, and it was a birthday gift, and it was a, you know, pretty straightforward watch. It was a stainless steel Rolex Datejust with diamonds, so it wasn't a particularly expensive piece, but I had a great relationship with the sales agent who served us. I had a lovely conversation. I made it abundantly clear that I was an enthusiast of watches. I had a Rolex on my wrist when I went in there. That's important to note. You know, they knew that I wasn't a time waster. I was wearing a watch. I was buying a Rolex watch, so they know that you're somebody who's serious. Having bought the Datejust for my wife, I entered into a conversation about, you know, I'm interested in expanding my own collection, and for me that would be a Submariner. That time, sort of summertime 2019, you know, a look came over the sales agent's face, and he said, oh, you know, that's going to be a tricky sort of trick to pull out of the hat here. Those are very sought after. There's an extensive waiting list. He did mention the fact, I think there were in excess of sort of 50 people waiting for a sub on their list. And I said, look, you know, I appreciate that. I'm aware of the situation with these stainless steel professional pieces. Why don't you just go ahead, put me on the list, and when one comes in, you know, I'll be ready to buy. I'm in a position to buy. Give me a call. If somebody drops out, I'll either have the no date or the date. I was hopeful to get the no date, obviously, that was my preference. So that was it, walked away from there. I went to another authorised dealer, the one where I bought my original stainless steel Datejust from my personal watch, and I also went on the waiting list there. Popped in there and I had a conversation with them, and I said, you know, same thing, looking for a Rolex Submariner, either date or no date, give me a call. And that was it, walked away, went on holidays, came back. About 2 months later, had two phone calls waiting for me on my voicemail. One was from Mallory's in Bath, saying that my no-date Submariner had come into stock and was available for me when I wanted to collect it. And by a bizarre quirk of fate, if it is fate, I had a call from the other authorised dealer that I'd made an interest with, and they said that both a Submariner and a no-date Submariner had come into stock, and I was welcome to purchase either. So that was after 2 months of waiting for that watch. Struck me as being a bit strange in a way, because I thought, well, you know, I'd been led to believe that this would be at least 6 months wait, if not much longer than that. But I was pleased. I wanted to buy one. I was in a position to buy one. So I tripped along to Mallory's in Bath. Now, I made the decision to buy from that authorised dealer merely because, and I bought, you know, a Rolex from each of these authorised dealers in the past, so there was no preference in building an ongoing relationship with them. But I went to Mallory's because of the buying experience. The sales agent had been engaging, chatty, we'd had a conversation. He was wearing a Rolex Submariner when I went in there. On another occasion I went in, he was wearing a Batman, and he allowed me to look at them, try them on. My young son tried them on. These were watches that were very hard to find at the time, and I just built I had a better feeling about the place. You know, it was just an all-round better place. It was a family-owned company, had been for many generations. I connected with the ethos of that authorized dealer, so I took my money to them. I put my money where my mouth was, and I chose to buy from that authorized dealer. Took delivery of my Submariner. At that time they cost 5,750, so it was before British pounds. That was before the uplift in sort of I think it was around December time in the UK that Rolex put their prices up. So I got a bit of luck, and that was my buying experience. So what has it been like on the wrist after 12 months? Well, I've worn this watch consistently for the last, well, it's just over 12 months now. It's probably 13, getting on for 14 months. And I don't mollycoddle my watches. I have 3 watches in my very small collection which I wear with regularity. That's my Datejust, which I wear for dress. I have this Submariner, which I wear as my sort of everything else watch. And I also have a Tudor GMT, Black Bay, which I wear, I wouldn't say as a beater, but it's a watch which I wear probably if I wouldn't want to wear a Rolex. You know, I'd wear the Tudor perhaps if I was a little bit concerned that some damage may come to the watch, or if I was going to a less salubrious area perhaps, and you know, I didn't want to be seen wearing a Rolex. I would say that the watch has absolutely performed as I would have expected to. Now, I don't mollycoddle my watches. This watch has been in the water, it's been on my wrist, I wear it to work, and you know, I've got a job which it doesn't really involve hard labor or anything like that. I'm not knocking it around, but I wouldn't be concerned about wearing it to watch, because after all, this is a professional diver's watch. It's a really tough piece which is designed, to go to 1,000 feet underwater. It's designed to take a knock, and it's got such an incredible robustness to it that it gives me a great deal of confidence in the wearing this watch. Albeit, it's clearly a very expensive watch. It's not something I want to damage, but it's something which gives me confidence in the wearing of it. And I just really like the fact as well that it is certainly a chameleon watch. It's something which you can wear in the summertime in shorts and a t-shirt if you're on holiday. Or, like today, I'm wearing a linen jacket, pair of chino slacks. It looks good in semi-formal. Or, as I say, because of that sort of historic connection with James Bond, who's given it a sort of prestige lift, perhaps over other dive watches, you can wear it in formal clothing if you wanted to wear it with a suit. I personally don't wear it with a suit. I think it's a little informal. I'm a bit more classic than that. I'm a bit more conservative, but I know I could do if I wanted. If I was going away somewhere on holiday and I only wanted to take one watch, I could take the Sub, and it would cover me for all those situations that I may encounter because of the chameleon nature of that dive watch. It's kind of accepted everywhere. So what are the pros and cons then? Let's talk about the other things. Well, first of all, what's the pros? Well, it's the bracelet. The bracelet on this piece, the glide lock bracelet, makes this a watch which always fits perfectly. It takes a moment to adjust. It's easily adjustable, and with that 2mm increments that you're able to adjust the glide lock bracelet, you never have a problem with it not fitting. You'll always find it that exact setting that you want, and that isn't something you can say about all watches. I have a Tudor GMT which came on the metal bracelet, and very quickly I moved it onto a leather bracelet because the metal just didn't have that level of micro adjustment that I wanted. I just couldn't get it to fit the way I wanted. That is never the case with the glide lock. It's always going to fit. That's its greatest attribute, and I'm very pleased to see that on the new Rolex Submariner, the 2020 model, Rolex have chosen not to play around. They've got the winning formula on the glide lock. That's still in place. What are the pros, would I say? Well, really, it's robustness. The fact that it does take a knock and a ding, you don't have to worry about it, and that's kind of the things that appeal to me. When it comes to the cons, though, are there cons as well? Well, yeah, it's not a perfect watch. I was somewhat worried. Now, I've got a 6.5-inch wrist, and I was worried that this 40mm case And 40mm it doesn't really do it justice. It's a bit chunkier than that. Because of the rather large oyster case with quite thick lugs, it wears bigger than a 40mm. And with a 6.5-inch wrist, I was worried that this watch would dwarf my wrist. It would be too large and it would be uncomfortable to wear, and it wouldn't sort of fit in with my lifestyle because I would feel it was too chunky. I'm pleased to say that wasn't the case. It is a light watch. It sits quite squat on the wrist. It isn't sort of a top-heavy watch like the Tudor GMT actually, which quite is. But this watch, it sort of sits quite low and it allows you to wear it without any worries to a degree. But if you've got anything less than a 6.5-inch wrist, I would suggest you would need to be a little bit weary about buying it. The other thing with the Submariner is, again, its iconic status. You know, it is a watch which everybody knows what it is, or anybody with any knowledge of wristwatches. So if you're wearing this, you know, if you're wearing it down certain parts of the back streets of London, for instance, and somebody clocks you wearing this watch, you know, if you're not wearing a jacket, if you've got a short sleeve shirt on, you know, you are presenting a target to people who may have criminal intentions for your watch, because it's a lot of money. It's a lot of money which is invested in a timepiece, which, let's be honest, you know, one of the beauties of Rolex watches is they hold their value. They can easily be translated into funds if ever the time needs. So criminals acknowledge that as well. So if you're seen wearing this in the wrong place at the wrong time, you know, it could be parted from your company by somebody with those intentions. So that iconic status actually works against you in some situations. Although, to be honest, nobody in the year I've owned this watch has ever come up to me and said, wow, is that a Rolex Submariner? You know, it does fly under the radar because perhaps it is the most copied wristwatch in the world. There might be the assumption that it's not real, or it's just one of the multitude of dive watches out there which looks like a Rolex Submariner. Who's going to think that I own a real Submariner? You know, who thinks anybody does? They all look the same. So there is that side of it. It is so copied that people don't assume that it's a real one, and nobody's ever come up to me and said, wow, is that a Rolex? People don't do that actually in the UK. We're not, you know, we're quite a modest and unassuming race of people, thankfully. But in my mind, I'm a little bit cautious about wearing it in certain places, and I would take it off if I was visiting perhaps London, and I wouldn't wear it walking around the sort of tourist areas if it was easily visible. So there we are, that's kind of the bones of it. But what is my overall assessment in a summarised sort of paragraph or two about this watch? Well, I've really enjoyed owning the Rolex Submariner. It's not a watch which I've purchased which has caused me a moment of regret. I know it's probably worth as much, if not more, than when I bought it right now. So it doesn't bother me, you know, it's an investment really. I know that I've made a good investment. I've bought a watch which I have loved since I've owned it. I don't intend to let this watch go. It'll be a watch which stays in my collection because of that chameleon status, that I can wear it with any sort of ensemble of clothing. It's a watch which crosses the boundaries of formal and informal, and that's a tough thing to do. It sits well on my wrist, it's comfortable, it's easily adjustable, it's got everything going for it. If anything, the only thing which shocked me was its price. I think it is expensive for what they are, but then again, you could say the same about any prestige piece. They're a lot more expensive now than they were when I bought one, so I'm not complaining, I'm happy. How do I feel about the new model? It's so strikingly similar to the 2019 model. I would not feel any compulsion about going in and swapping this one for a new one. I'm quite happy that they look very similar. The movement a bit better in the new one, you know, it's got longer power reserve, but then with this being a no date sub, which takes no effort to change the date if it's run down, that doesn't bother me at all. And I'm not somebody who feels this desperate need to keep up with the zeitgeist, you know, of any new pieces. I'm still running an iPhone 6, so and you know, I think the iPhone 12 will be coming out shortly. So you can see I'm not somebody who feels compelled to keep up with fashion. So I'm very happy with the piece. It'll be in the collection. I have no regrets about buying it. In fact, I'm delighted that I added it to my collection just over a year ago, and I can see it being there for many a year to come. And again, the buying experience. Choose an authorized dealer well, build a relationship, and you know, I think it will work out for you if you do that, and you know, you'll build a fruitful relationship going forward if you stick to one authorized dealer and get that relationship going. Well, I hope you've enjoyed this review of my Rolex Submariner. It's been a bit longer than I expected, but I wanted to give you a really good overview of the buying, owning and wearing experience of this iconic watch. If you have enjoyed it, give us a thumbs up and don't forget to subscribe to us as well. You won't miss any of our future material, and don't forget to leave any comments you have in the comment section below. I really love to hear from you guys and interact with you on any of our topics of men's grooming, style and self-development. So, until the next time we meet, take care of yourselves and your family, look sharp, smell great, and we'll meet again very soon.